As a man, there's many different things that we have that can be attractive to a woman. It could be our personality, it could be our looks or our height, it could be our status, it could even be the amount of money that we have, or the fact that we have a 12-inch rocket in our pocket. Different things float different boats for women. However, out of all of them, there's one in particular that is the most attractive and irresistible to a woman, and that is your sexual discipline. I'm going to talk today about how many of us men have fallen into the trap of losing that discipline over the years, what we need to do in order to fix it, and most importantly, why women find men who are sexually disciplined the most attractive. So, how did we get undisciplined in the first place? Well, we need to look at the beginning when we first discovered our own sexuality, and usually that started at a very early age in our life. For me, I was 7 years old when I first discovered Playboy magazines under my dad's bed. I can still remember opening up the magazine for the first time and being in complete shock and awe with seeing how many beautiful naked women there were posed provocatively, which was making me feel a certain way. And that was enough to get me started in my curiosity about the female body and eventually into my sexuality in the years to come. Now, I grew up in the 80s. I'm 45 right now, and this was the pre-internet era. So if you grew up during that time, you knew that access to this type of content was very limited. There was really only two forms of content that you could access at that time. It was either through a magazine or through a VHS tape. And in order to access those things, you had to have some sort of sketchy hookup. And not only that, you had to pay for this stuff too. It wasn't free. So for a lot of us growing up who didn't have jobs, who was scrounging up our allowance, it was a very cumbersome process just to get access to that kind of stuff. But we still pursued, we found creative ways to do it. And then came the internet and the rise of the smartphone. And that completely changed everything. Because no longer did you have to deal with the shame, the guilt of having to go through a sketchy process or even pay for that stuff. It was now all available for free and in the convenience of your computer or with smartphones in your own pocket. And no longer did anybody know that you were doing something like this. Now, what's interesting is that back in the day, like sexual education in school didn't really teach you about the dangers of consuming porn and watching the sexual act on the screen and getting off to it. They talked about things like contraception, how to prevent pregnancy, STDs, just even the process of sex itself, how it's used to produce a baby, a human being. But none of it ever talked about the dangers of consuming this kind of content on a regular basis. So for a lot of us, this was just the norm. It wasn't abnormal if you knew of a guy who was, getting off to a screen. It was just common amongst all of us. And this continued over time, as we got into early adulthood, we started dating women as well as consuming this content at the same time, because now we have the best of both worlds. We can have it in real life, and when she's not around or if she's not feeling like it, we can still get that same feeling by getting off on a screen. Now, you got to imagine this is years of conditioning our mind that this is what sexuality is. And eventually we get into a marriage, we have a family, we have kids. And for a lot of us who have been in those types of situations, you already know that in a lot of cases, sometimes the flame goes away and you have no more intimacy, no more romance. You'd be lucky to have sex once a month, if that, a few times a year. And so what's your fallback? Well, you can always go back to the screen. So over time, what started off as curiosity now turned into something that we've started to utilize to cope with depression, stress, loneliness, something that sex was never intended for. And because it's become something that we lean on to make us feel better when we're feeling down, this is when we become undisciplined with it. And that's when we start becoming needy. And when you become needy, you can imagine, what these needy guys look like out in the world. They're desperate, they're clingy, and it's an absolute turnoff to women. So how do we fix this mess that we got ourselves in and start building sexual discipline again? Well, the best solution is to get on to NoFap and semen retention. And if you don't know what that is, it essentially means that you stop and refrain from watching these videos and getting off to it on a screen and replace that with a healthy habit. And you do this for periods of time until you no longer feel that addiction to that habit anymore. And it's one of the harder challenges because, again, this is an addiction that many of us have been dealing with for many, many years, and it takes time to crack it. Now, once you get on this practice and you're able to get on long enough streaks, you eventually adopt it as a lifestyle. And that's when your life completely changes because now you've established sexual discipline and a real connection to your sexuality again. I'm going to share with you 3 of the biggest benefits on how NoFap and semen retention helps you build sexual discipline in a way that makes you irresistible and attractive to women. Number 1, it will help you restore your manhood. For a lot of us men that have been hooked on the screen for quite some time, we've had issues in the bedroom. And when I say issues, a lot of us have experienced erectile dysfunction when trying to have sex with a woman in real life. I remember this is something that affected me early on when I started consuming this content on VHS tapes and eventually onto the computer screen. And I always thought, well, maybe it was something that was off in the relationship, or maybe I wasn't feeling it, or maybe we had a few too many drinks. But in hindsight, I can clearly see that this addiction to the screen absolutely hindered me from being able to have deep, authentic connection with a woman. And in turn, I couldn't get it up and have fun. And so after I got onto NoFap and semen retention and was able to heal myself, I was able to now perform in a way that I wasn't able to before. Not only could I get it up, I could keep it up for a longer period of time. And not only that, because I wasn't consuming the screen, I didn't feel that sex was a performance or an act anymore. It was actually something that was a lot more beautiful, and I was able to have a deeper connection with a woman. Now, women love when a guy can stay hard for a long period of time. And I think part of it is because you can be a lot more intimate, and it has nothing to do with just conducting an act that you saw on a screen. Women love that level of performance that you can give when you're able to keep it up and aroused. It makes them feel good about themselves because they know that they're able to arouse you in a way that you like. So it's a two-way street there, and it's a beautiful experience to have with a woman. And I remember I was telling one of my girlfriends at the time, some of the issues that I had with my addiction to the screen and how I discovered NoFap and semen retention. I was surprised that a lot of them didn't even know what that was. And when I explained why I did it and my whole intention with it and the fact that I was able to achieve, this result with my manhood, it actually turned her on. So that's a second big benefit of going on NoFap and semen retention and building your sexual discipline. Women really find it attractive when you are not leading with sex and are not needy with sex. And so I know for her, she was like, oh my God, so you mean, because she's met quite a few guys who used to get off on the screen. That's like 99% of guys out there. When you're on semen retention and NoFap, you're like that 2 to 1% of men who are just like in a whole different realm. And it's interesting for women to meet a woman. It's interesting for women to meet a man in an over-sexualized world and finding that this is a guy who's not succumbing to societal pressures around sex. It's very attractive to her, and if anything, it makes it that much more comfortable and easier for her to trust you, because they know that your intention is not sex only, that you're actually looking for a deeper connection. So I found that with a couple girlfriends, that when I mentioned to them what I did and how I healed myself, it absolutely turned them on. They wanted me even more because I wasn't desperate for sex anymore. It was a huge game changer in that regard. However, number 3 is the biggest one. This is the biggest cheat code in life when it comes to having sexual discipline and why it's such a game changer with women. Now, when you go on NoFap and you restore your manhood and you're no longer leading with sex, you're not a needy person when it comes to sex. It's no longer your guiding light in life. For a very long period of time, I used to live in a world where everything that I did, everything I tried to do would hopefully result in me meeting a woman and potentially being able to have intimate relations with her. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's an innate part of us that wants that. But when that's your sole guiding light in life and you're not able to have to find a woman, you can imagine how depressing that is for many men if that's your main goal. You feel like a failure all the time. And most importantly, it's one of the most unrealistic goals for you to set. And when you're able to now release yourself from this addiction, when you're not looking anymore to just have sexual relationships with women and you have more discipline around it, you actually have energy to focus on your life, to create your purpose, to go in your direction. And when a woman meets a man who is not blinded by sex or women in the same way that 99% of other men are, she admires and respects your purpose too, because now you're in a position to lead and to inspire her to follow your lead, to be within your frame, as they say. And that's the biggest reason why you become so attractive when you have sexual discipline, is because now you are, in the woman's mind, a masculine man, and you're no longer a slave to your sexuality and one of the many other guys who are just desperate and clingy when it comes to sex. So it's a huge game changer. NoFap and semen retention is your ticket to gaining sexual discipline again. And one of the biggest benefits of that is now getting that female attraction that deep down we've always wanted to have, but it's no longer prioritized because of sex. That's not our guiding light. We've now found ourselves again and have a healthy relationship with our sexuality as well as our own relationship with ourselves. So I hope this message resonates you and finds you at the right time. I'd love to hear your comments on how NoFap and semen retention has also helped you restore your sexual discipline and how it's helped you to attract women. Otherwise, I really appreciate your support for all my videos, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Peace out.